Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Miguel. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Steve, for organizing, and Tussle for hosting in place. So just to give you a bit of context about me, first I'll just do an intro, and then I'll do an agenda. I'm in a weird position where I don't really consider myself a developer in the sense that I started learning app development, just a couple months ago, like around December of last year. I'm a supply chain professional by day. So I actually work for Spotify. My first job was at Apple. I used to work at Amazon too. But what I do is procurement. I negotiate contracts, so mostly legal stuff, commercial stuff. I don't write a single line of code at work. But I got curious in AR and VR development when the VisionPro came out. And of course, XR has been an industry for many years. There are many experts out there. But I thought what Apple came out with the headset, the technology behind the hardware and the software was something. Maybe not an iPhone moment, maybe not yet, but I thought there was something there. And that's why I decided to use my free time, my creative energy to do visionOS development. So I've focused solely on visionOS native technology. So ARKit, RealityKit, Reality Composer Pro. I will explain what those are if you're not familiar with them. But since then, since I published my first app in January, I have been featured by Apple a few times. Actually, just a couple of days ago, the App Store, Twitter account, Facebook account featured my app for visionOS. I've been on the front page of the App Store a few times. So yeah, I've had some luck so far, but it's still very early days. And of course, the number of apps aren't that big yet for visionOS, so it is a limited sample size. But with that, what I'll show will be the fundamentals of visionOS, all the frameworks, the APIs. I'll also go over an open source project that I published on the App Store, and then the whole code is on GitHub. So you'll be able to look at that, and I'll show that in a minute. But first, I'll give you a quick preview of what I've built for visionOS. This will be some short videos. And what I've decided to focus more is on education. Nothing as advanced as what's going on at the lab here, but I thought that the VisionPro is a really great piece of technology to educate people. So one of the first apps that I did is called Museas, and it's basically an art history app. You have an immersive environment when you're in a virtual museum hall. You also can just be in your own space. And it's really just a way to explore art from early Renaissance to modern art. Some artwork pieces, I've added some immersive environments that kind of extend the artwork. And then, of course, you can learn about the artists themselves. I've added narrated guides. You can browse through many artists. You can learn about different art movements, browse by those. And then, of course, I wanted to focus on recognizing the repositories, i.e. museums primarily, that have really protected their artwork, made sure that they're preserved, and then distributed that for people to enjoy in real life. So that's one of the first apps that I've done, Museas. The other one is called Astronoma. It's basically an immersive space center to learn about the universe. My partner is an astrophysicist just at the other school here in Cambridge, so he was a bit of an inspiration. But again, it's just a education app. It has images from across the universe, from many different space programs, space missions, the telescopes. A lot of these are public sources. So for example, NASA and ESA have published their telescope models that I just imported. I recreated the Martian surface with actual photography from Perseverance rover. And again, it's just a way to learn about the universe. It's in my view, it's not that difficult to build something like this. And I'll show you in the code, in the examples, that it's not that difficult to get started with visionOS. And again, coming from someone who did not study computer science or programming and just did this as a side hobby, I think Apple really nailed the way to help people introduce them into visionOS development, even if you don't have a background. Okay, so again, agenda, I'll go over visionOS and Apple Vision Pro. Then I'll help explain just the setup environment, some tips and tricks. Then we'll go through the live code demo, which we'll go in detail there, what that looks like. And then I'll dive deeper specifically on the hand tracking API. That's a lot more tricky and advanced. So depending on the level here in the audience, I think if this might be too much, but if you're already familiar with programming, I think you might find this part interesting. And then just final comments on the future of visionOS from my opinion. But with that, I like to keep the talks casual. So if you have any questions while I go through this, please raise your hand, interrupt. I mean that we can keep it conversational. Yeah, thank you.
I actually have a question. Do you need to license the images that you used for art and as well as?
Good question. I have gotten that. So no, the reason why is for the art app, those are in the public domain because artwork, they're very old, right? They've been around for centuries. There are some specific laws regarding like licensing from the museum's artwork if you're using it, like you're printing it on t-shirts, for example. There is some accreditation that you have to do, but not in the case for Museas. Also, these apps are free, so I'm not like making money from them. And then for Astronoma, again, those are public domain. They're right published from the US government in NASA's case or ESA. Okay, so visionOS and Apple Vision Pro. I have the Vision Pro here. At the end, if anyone wants to come up and handle it or even try it, it's kind of a pain to have people try it on with the guest mode, but I'll have time, I can set it up. But yeah, beautiful piece of hardware. Obviously prohibitively expensive. I think that's a big issue. And I hope that Apple can send out more dev kits for free for people who are interested in developing for it. But keep in mind that the Vision Pro just was announced a year ago, right, at last WWDC, and it was launched a few months ago in January. So it's still very, very early stages. I think people forget that it's still relatively new. You hear a lot that, well, Vision Pro is not selling well, or there aren't that many apps, because it's still new. We're still very early stages. So the Vision Pro, in order to develop on it, you really only need 3 main frameworks that come from iOS already. And that's Swift UI, and it's in the name. It's how you build the UI interface. Reality Kit, which powers more reality, AR, VR, and then AR Kit, kind of same thing. I'll differentiate those in the next slide. But the key part about this, what I want to call out, is that it's not like Apple just dropped a whole bunch of new frameworks with Vision Pro. These have been in existence for many years already. There's a lot of documentation out there. It's just applying it to a different hardware. To develop for the Vision Pro, you need Xcode, obviously. Something that it's kind of a footnote, but a big footnote is you need an Apple Silicon Mac. So if you have an Intel Mac, you cannot run the visionOS simulator. The project won't build. I had to get a new MacBook just to build for Vision Pro, so keep that in mind. And then Unity is also supported. I haven't used Unity, but I hear it's another way to build Vision Pro apps. I've also heard the license fee for developers is quite high. I think it's like $2,000 a year, whereas for visionOS, Apple's development program is just $100 a year. So keep that in mind. More personal opinion, I think the hardware and the software is amazing. If you haven't tried it yet, please do go to the Apple Store in Boylston or here in Cambridge. It is really quite an extraordinary piece of technology, but it is impractical in the sense that I get tired of using it after an hour. My head starts hurting, my vision starts getting strained. I've heard some people can go a lot longer, but yeah, it's not. I don't think it's a final consumer product as much as Apple wants you to think, right? I do think it's more of a development kit for now. So for setup, as I mentioned, you just need to enroll into the Apple Developer Program. It's $100 a year. I believe they waive it for students, or I think you can apply for that, but it's not that much. For Vision Pro specifically, again, you need an Apple Silicon, an M series. The one that I've been using is an M3 with 18 gigabytes of RAM and a terabyte of storage. I call this out specifically because when I was looking to buy a new MacBook for Vision Pro development, on Reddit and on different threads, I would read that the MacBook Air was a great development computer because of the M chip was already super fast. I'm glad I did not get a MacBook Air. This MacBook Pro gets hot. The fans go off when I'm doing Vision Pro development, which is rare for an M series MacBook. And that is really because it's the visionOS simulator and building apps for Apple Vision Pro is very graphics heavy. So it really makes the computer work. So I would not recommend doing anything less than the base MacBook Pro. For running the actual simulator, there's the latest version 1.2 that you can download from Xcode. Version 2.0 was just recently announced last month at WWDC. I was there, I got to see the new capabilities with some Apple engineers. It looks amazing. I think between Vision 1.0 and Vision 1.2, there has been many updates and changes. It's almost more of a major update, in my opinion, than minor updates. So I wouldn't worry about developing or supporting anything below 1.2. 99.9% of VisionPro owners are already on 1.2. In fact, there's been some numbers online on the internet floating that I think 46% of VisionPro owners already have the 2.0 beta, which isn't open to the public. So it's because it introduced some new features. So don't bother with anything less than 1.2. Now, there are two other programs that you need besides Xcode. That's Reality Converter, which I'll touch on in a minute, and Reality Composer Pro. And then a comment on the simulator. It's buggy. So I don't recommend it for serious development. Unfortunately, I do think you need the actual device for development as much as it costs. There's also it's a completely different experience building your app in a 2D window, right? Seeing it in that way versus experiencing it in three dimensions in the headset. And you start noticing a lot of minute details that may seem insignificant, but do make a huge impact in user interface, user experience, and of course, just technical bugs and all that. Yes?
The simulator buggy, is it because of RAM? Like you need higher gigabyte, or is it because of the program itself is so developed?
Yeah, it's the program itself. Yeah, I mean, I've seen from other developers posts that, they have better machines than I do, and it's the same bug, and it's reproducible, which means it's the software itself, right? So yeah, and of course, Apple's working on it. For example, hand tracking. You can't test hand tracking on the simulator because your MacBook doesn't have the LiDAR scanners, right? And if you run an app with hand tracking on the simulator, it will crash the simulator and Xcode. So there are limitations like those. Yeah. Yeah. I guess. I mean, it goes up to, I think, it's very high, right? And yeah, it's expensive to go up to upgrade. Yes, and I don't think I included it in this slideshow, but I've pulled up Activity Monitor when I'm developing just visionOS, nothing else in the background, not even Spotify, and it's already over 18. Like it has to transfer some memory to the hard drive and swap. So yeah, it gets pretty heavy. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So just a quick screenshot of Xcode if you haven't seen it. It's just an IDE, pretty simple, nice organization. It's a great tool. I don't use any other external code editing tool. I just stick with Xcode. This is a picture of Reality Composer Pro. Reality Composer Pro is how you build your AR or VR scenes. It's not a way to build models. It's not like Blender, for example. You already have to have the assets, but you import the assets into Reality Composer Pro, and here's where you build those scenes. And I'll show you in the live demo example more of that functionality. And then from Reality Composer Pro, we have that globe, for example. This is how it would look like in the actual headset. In this case, this is a simulator screen shot, but same concept. And then for Reality Converter, that is a simple program that lets you just basically convert most major 3D files into USDZ. And USDZ is Apple's main file format for 3D models. It was invented by Pixar. It's very, very good in the sense that it's a small file size, very effective, rich content. It can support animations, and it works pretty much seamlessly with Apple devices. So if you're going to use 3D models, they need to be in USDZ. Okay, so now I'll go into the actual frameworks, high-level overview. SwiftUI is really what you're going to be working with for the most part. So if you're going to start learning, start with SwiftUI. It's how you build the user interface and to a degree the user experience as well. SwiftUI has been in support already for many years for the Apple ecosystem. and it already natively supports 3D capabilities. So it's as simple as writing one line of code, for example, to add depth or to add gestures or 3D effects to your existing code. And then it interfaces seamlessly with Reality Kit and AR Kit for volumetric content. It works with UI Kit. So if people have coded before for iOS, for example, I know UI Kit was the previous framework. It still works seamlessly, so you don't have to refactor your code. It still works. I started though with Swift UI, and I would highly recommend you start with Swift UI. That is the future. Apple has made it very clear time and time again. Don't bother with other frameworks. Don't bother with UI Kit anymore. Swift UI and Swift in general is the future. AR Kit is Apple's 3D rendering engine, and it really just allows, it's more like the back end of how the application renders 3D content, whether it's on an iPhone or in the Apple Vision Pro. And it adds capabilities like detecting light, casting shadows. Reality Kit is more on understanding the user's environment. So it's in the name. It's more for like understanding surfaces, for placing content on surfaces. It's really the main world detection technology that Apple uses in the background. And again, I'll show you the code of that, what that looks like. Any questions on this before I go on? Okay. Oh, yes. No, please. Correct. Yeah, it's just 3 lines of code. Import Swift UI, import Reality Kit, import AR Kit, and you're good to go. Yep. And then if you forget to import it, Xcode will remind you you're missing to import this. That's it. Yep. And then of course you can go into the code of those packages and really dive deep, but that's even way above my head. So nope. Okay. So I'm going to talk about how you can present your app on the Vision Pro. And this part is actually very important. The reason why it's important is because some APIs and frameworks will only work on certain views, I guess you can call them. So you can make your app using 1, 2, or a combination of these different views. First one is a window, and it's basically just a 2D screen. So if you imagine that you're in AR or VR, it's just a floating 2D screen. It's great for reading text, for example, or just displaying an image. A volume is a cube where primarily you can insert 3D models. It lets you walk around the cube, move the cube around, place it. And then lastly, there's spaces. And spaces is essentially the virtual reality space. So it takes over the user's entire view. You can enable pass-through, so it could still look like you're in mixed reality or augmented reality, but it really compartmentalizes the app. The reason why is that Spaces enables the app to use more advanced APIs like hand tracking or like room tracking, because it protects the user's privacy. If the app takes over the whole space, there's no background app that can access that information. So if you're going to implement a space, a VR, for example, view, you won't be able to have other apps in the background open. That's the main distinction. And I'll show you more in the code why that, or how that looks like. But big distinction. I'll show you some screenshots of what that looks like. So here's a window of Astronoma. So the background is the moon environment that already comes on the Vision Pro. That's 3D, but the app content is a 2D window here, right? It's great for text, great for images. You can move the window around. Here, I'm showing a combination of a 2D window, which is in the background, and then a volume view, which is a cube. And you obviously can't see the cube, right? But this little chihuahua here is enclosed in that cube. And then lastly, this is a space. So I recreated a museum hall and placed the paintings in the background. When you're in the Vision Pro, this looks 3D. It looks like you're in an actual museum hall. There's depth. You can move around it. but it's completely taken over the VisionPro, and there's no other app that you can run in the background. But because of this, I can use a lot more advanced APIs that are available to developers to make it more immersive. Yeah.
Where you have system other app, same way different names are, or is it only a static option? So, in other words, could you have kind of a lab where all of your applications were able to move through?
Yes, I think if I'm following, you can build like mini apps, for example, but it has to be within the same app. Like when the user opens the app on the VisionPro, everything that you want to present has to be already packaged in that app. That makes sense. So for example, in this museum view, I like to go back to Spotify example, but if I wanted to bring up a little Spotify play window, I couldn't. I have to exit the app in order to show it.
Or could you build in a Spotify window?
You could, yes, yeah. And I've seen some apps do that where they'll implement a simple web browser, so you can be in an immersive environment but still browse the web. So yeah, you could do that. I suspect Apple will unlock this at some point because it is limiting, but I can understand the privacy, and Apple, being very tight about privacy, I can understand why they've locked this in. Okay, so let me show you a live demo of some code. What I hope to accomplish in this little demo is to show that it's not that difficult. It's just a few lines of code. I'm going to show you how to present a 3D model into a 2D window. And again, the project that I'm going to show is called Augmenos Code. This app is live on the App Store, so it's been approved by Apple. It's been vetted. I don't have anything in there that, for example, if you tried, Apple wouldn't like. And all the source code is on GitHub. So feel free to download, fork it, mess around with it. But let me show you what we're going to do really quick. We're not going to do this whole thing. What we're going to do is just present a 3D model, in this case, a little heart model in a 2D window. And here it looks 2D, right? But once I play the video, you can see that it's actually a model. You can rotate it. If you kind of look around it, it pops out of the 2D window. Pretty simple. So with that, let me pull up Xcode. Before I start showing that, any questions? Okay. So this is Xcode. So again, all this source code is on GitHub, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. Is that small? Let me make that bigger.
Will you share your slides?
They're already on GitHub, same slides. Yep, so it's all there. Yeah, no worries about taking notes. Okay, so this is when you start a new project in Xcode, you get kind of basic code already built in. And this is how it'll give you a window group, which is when you run the app, it will run window group, and whatever view you have is the first view that will be presented. And then Reality Composer Pro. So if you start a new project as well for visionOS, it will come with these packages, and it'll come with Reality Kit content. Reality Kit content is where you access the Reality Composer Pro project, which you can open here, and then it'll pull up Reality Composer Pro. This is where you can build your scenes, and you would drag in, for example, the 3D assets, or for example, sound files as well, or animation files. And then you would compose, as it's in the name, your scene. And then in 1 or 2 lines of code, you'll be able to run it in Xcode and therefore VisionPro, which I'll show you now. So I won't do this now, but quick project setup. I created a new scene. It's basically file, new scene. I called it heart. And then I had this 3D heart model that I downloaded from Sketchfab, open source license, Creative Commons, and I just imported it in here. Again, USDZ file, but if it wasn't in USDZ, you would just use Reality Converter to convert it. It takes like 2 seconds, very easy. Okay, so let's build that. I'm gonna do file, a new Swift UI view. and let's just call it demo view. So this is your standard view. I will run this just so you can see what the base looks like. But first I just need to change this. So we will run this in the simulator, which you can select here. And then the simulator will run. So what we should see is just text that says hello world, right? And it will be in 2D, meaning in a 2D view. And give it a minute. It usually does not take this long, actually. Of course, it's a demo, so something's going to go wrong. No, there we go. Okay, so just text, right? Hello world. So now I'm going to show you how to add that 3D model. Super quick, simple. I just have my notes here in case I forgot. So we're going to do model. Oh, to someone's question about importing. Yes, so we need import reality kit and then import reality kit content. We don't need AR kit in this case because we're not doing any advanced like world tracking. We're just presenting the heart. And reality kit content is where our assets are in this package. Reality kit content is just the default name, but you could call it whatever. You can call it my assets or whatever. Or was it demo view? Okay, yep. So now you basically just do model 3D, or sorry, model 3D, not view.
So if it is the namespace, how does it build the
It's already pre-built into Swift. Yeah, it's already comes with Xcode. Every app is built with Swift and Foundation. Swift UI includes both. So yeah, and that's why it's best to just start with Swift UI. So model 3D named, we're going to call it heart. This name is coming from Reality Composer Pro. So I named this file, right, heart. I put a little heart model in this Composer Pro itself. You can, for example, scale it. You can transform it, move its positions. You can add animations. You can do all your stuff there without code, which is really helpful. You can do it with code for a lot more advanced features, right? But you don't need to code that yourself. So the project for the asset's called heart, and the bundle is in the Reality Kit content bundle. Again, if you named this something else like my stuff, you would just call it my stuff bundle. And now this part is a little bit more complicated, but what we're doing here is we're adding it in a closure so that it can load the content asynchronously. So if we load the 3D model on the main thread, right, if it's a big file, it might take 1 or 2 seconds. Your app is going to freeze and it's going to be a terrible user interface experience. So this is just loading it in the background and then it'll present it once it's done. This asset is super small. It'd be basically instantaneous, so you wouldn't notice it anyway, but very good practice. So we're referencing the model now that it's loaded. Let me just run the code. If I just do it like this, oh, I forgot to close this. No, what did I do? Oh, and then that's what I forgot. We need to add the actual placeholder view. So while it's loading, it's called progress view. Progress view is the spinner when something's loading. It's really nice that Apple just adds it too. You don't have to code a nice loading screen. It just comes with a spinner. So if I load it just like this is what we'll get. I don't know if you saw that, but it did spin, it did load. So the heart is there. It's weird, it's wonky. The reason why is because it's super big, right? I scaled it bigger in Reality Composer Pro. In fact, you can go in here and you can see the actual scale and position of the asset. But what we want to do is we want to make it.
Can you line edit that size?
Yeah, I can edit it here. Oh, I see what you mean. No, you have to run the code again. Yeah, you do have to run the code again. But what you can also do is just add the resizable modifier, just one line code. And then you need to specify what aspect ratio, so it knows whether you want to fill it or fit it, right? So it doesn't get all stretched. I'm going to do .fit. And then lastly, you need to frame it. So it's basically containerizing it, right? I'm just going to do 250 by 250. That's it. And we'll run it again. And now there's your heart. Speaking of bugs, so you see how the heart is a little dark. The simulator does that. Sometimes for some reason, it renders the assets darker. If you change the scene, it'll render correctly. So now you can see it more. But that's it. There's your 3D model of a heart, just with these lines of codes. Now you can think of how creative you can get, adding a bunch of more assets, right? More models, adding text. If you go back to here, for example, so this is still our heart scene, right? I'm just going to drag the chest USDZ file right here. It's very big, so let's scale it down a bit. The reason why I'm scaling is because here we're scaling the whole reality composer scene, so the chest will still look big relative to the scene. But what I want to do is just put it next to it. So I just dragged the chest model in Reality Composer Pro. I'm saving this. I'm going to run the code again because we're still referencing the exact same file from Reality Composer Pro. Oh, simulator. And now you have the chest again in 3D. So that's it. If you can. What was that? Correct. Yep. If your assets already have animations, you can add animations. You can't, as of now, you can't create your own animations, but with visionOS 2.0, that's already in beta, you can. So not advanced animations, you probably still want another software for that, but some pretty good animation features. So yeah.
What tool did you use to create the assets? Blender or?
So these are public source assets from Sketchfab, but yeah, Blender, I've made my own assets on Blender. There is a USDZ export option in Blender, but it's buggy. So what I do is I export it to OBJ or GLTF, and then I use Reality Converter to use to convert them to USDZ and then import them here. But yeah, you can use really any 3D modeling software as long as you have the USDZ format at the end. But yeah, I hope this shows like it's not that complicated, right? If right now we're just showing two objects, but you can imagine, like I did, we created a whole museum hall with painting on the sides. You can add animations, you can add noise, like ambient noise, spatial noises, all in this Reality Composer Pro, and then you just run a few lines of code, and now you have it in the VisionPro.
Is there a license fee for those?
No. It's all, yeah, it's all comes with your membership as part of the Apple Developer Program. Yeah. So unlike Unity, for example, which there are. Yep.
I don't know maybe when you want to add rotating that.
Yes. So I think that's the beauty of Reality Composer Pro is that you can have it pretty basic where it's just drag and drop, move, but you can also reference anything in here in code and then go crazy with scripts, with functions, physics, for example. You can add physics components, collision components, get very granular.
So Unity has an extensive library of all these types of stuff.
Mm.
Some things,
Is that its own store or something for assets or?
Good.
Assets?
Yeah, good question. It does not. No, yeah. So it's just the tools, and then you have to go find them yourselves, like the assets, the scripts, or the code. So no, there's no. I mean, Apple does. Okay, so let me correct that. They give you like these assets to start with, but that's it. They're very basic, and they don't look great, to be honest. So it's just a way to get started. But there's no store for scripts or 3D assets. Good question. Yeah.
If I create some objects and want to display it in sort of a WebGL environment, I'm assuming that am not going to be able to convert that into a space in the Vision Pro, and I'm going to be stuck in a window. Is that what you expect?
So, so I'm not too familiar with WebGL, but I know, so WebXR is supported on the Vision Pro. It is supported. So you could build a WebXR experience and then access it directly on the Vision Pro through Safari, the web browser.
But am I, you think I'm going to be stuck in a window?
You're going to be,
I'm not going to be able to go into space.
No versus.
exactly, yeah, the flip actually. So you'll be stuck in a space to compartmentalize that. Yeah, and as far as I'm aware, you can't access pass-through in WebXR on the Vision Pro. So it also would have to be a complete VR experience.
And any thought about performance in that versus through here?
I mean, the Vision Pro is pretty hefty, actually. It's pretty in weight, literally, but also computationally. Yeah, I've been very impressed with what it's been able to render and process. I can't imagine that you'd have something in WebXR that it couldn't handle. To a degree. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there is something, but so far the ones I've experienced were running flawlessly. Yeah.
Ideally, I would walk along one of the rover paths, because you've probably seen the lunar moon space, where I think they just surround you with the photosphere, and you cannot move. Where I would hope that with the high resolution data along the footprint
You can
of
actually
the rover,
you can move.
you could go.
Yeah. So you can move if you're in a big enough space. I have seen people do that, but obviously you can start noticing when the assets start cutting off. And it's not just a 360 image sphere. There are 3D assets in the space, but there's that illusion effect, like in video games, right? You have 3D assets up close, but then in the background it's just an image. But yeah, to walk around in a scene, I have seen an app where you can walk into a virtual house. So they basically blowed up a USDZ file, and that lets you walk around virtually in a big space, obviously. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you live stream
Live stream.
data?
Well, data, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, like any social app, like you can't, as far as I'm aware, you can't live stream the camera, like 99% sure of that, because developers don't have access to the camera itself. But you can live stream data, as in like usage, for example, or like backend data points. Yeah.
So, okay, then I wanted to have a question too. What are the capabilities of live stream of the Vision Pro?
Yeah, I mean, there aren't that many really. Yeah, for that huge limitation of not having access to the cameras as a developer. With the footnote, enterprises do have access as a visionOS 2.0, but you have to have a registered enterprise account with Apple to access that. And it's because of privacy, right? Apple doesn't want apps to access a user's Vision Pro cameras and LiDAR sensors. I expect that will change in the future, though. So, yeah. Yeah, question? Oh, yeah, sorry, I thought I was showing this whole time. Ooh, yeah, so Apple uses both in Swift UI, and Swift in general, it uses struct and classes. Classes are reference types, and structs are what's that word called? Again, I'm not a programmer by trade, but it doesn't reference the same code. It like rebuilds it every time it's called. And the reason why this is a struct is because it's a view, and it's rebuilding every frame per second. It's basically. What do you mean? This is the code. This is demo view. Right here, we are creating a struct. No, this isn't actually even, don't even ignore that. That's not even, yeah. We are creating a struct called demo view. It's of type view. In this case, it's a Swift UI view. And this is what we're doing in that struct. And then the app, so the demo view is what we're showing. At the top level of the app, which you can see here because it's main, when the app launches, it's going to go look for the first window group, which is, and then it shows window view. Does that make sense now? Okay. Yeah, of course. Good question. Yes.
How much reusability is there between like a project that's made for like a Mac versus like an iPad versus a phone?
A lot. And that is the beauty of Swift and Swift UI, is that if you already have an existing app for iOS, on Mac, it's a bit different, but primarily also, it's not that much more refactoring to make it available for visionOS. Really, it's more about making the view appropriate for the spatial computing experience, right? So you don't want too much tiny text, for example, because that's going to be hard on the user to read. So it's just scaling it up. But yeah, it's super interoperable. A lot of apps that are built natively for iOS were quickly ported over to visionOS. You can tell which ones put a little bit of effort to make it look nice for VisionPro, and others that just, check the box to port it over. But yeah, it works. Sorry.
I'm curious what level of utilities are merging. So for example, it seems like we want to have multiple VisionPros in the same space. Are there utilities for that kind of thing? Are there libraries that are being developed or already exist?
So in the same space, there is an object tracking API that comes to mind where it will detect a specific reference object, for example, this tripod. And if multiple VisionPros are in the room and they have this app running that will detect that headset, you can code it so that it, like views for like text, for example, or something that's hovering, will show relative to that VisionPro owner. But of course, if you have multiple people, it'll show relative to their view.
And we want to see the other people.
So in that case, what I have seen is, and this works wonderfully, even if you're not in the same room, they're called spatial personas in FaceTime. And it lets you put a person in your space, in your living room, for example, or even here. And it shows a 3D face to a degree up to their chest here and some arm movement. It's hard to explain it, but it is amazing. It's very well done. First time I saw it, my mind was blown. It was eerie. It was freaky how good it was. But yeah, and then from there you can present content that both users will see, and it will synchronize across all the devices at the same time. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
When you're in a code and debug cycle, are you with the physical headset? Are you tethered? It's set to load updates dynamically, or
so I primarily use the simulator for development, and then when I'm ready to test more like production level, then I'll run on the VisionPro. And really, it's because I'm developing and coding for a couple hours at a time, and it would get exhausting to be in the VisionPro. But other developers, for sure, I've met others who they code all on the VisionPro because you can screen mirror your Mac as an enormous monitor in the VisionPro, and then run the code. It'll build your app right next to you. I've done that too, actually. It reminds me a lot of that Tony Stark scene where he's like talking to Jarvis and then making content on the side. It really does feel like that. I'm coding something, and then bam, the app opens in 3D right next to me. I have seen people use the battery, taped it on the back to use as a counterweight. Yeah.
I think if you can use the other kind of set, I think it just balances it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just answer your question of tethering. I think by default, you just like Wi-Fi push.
Correct.
But I know Apple does they sell a different section attachment. If you need to tether it, and sort of the speed would be much faster. Larger content.
Yeah, there's a strap that you can connect it to. It's I think $300. Yeah, question.
I have a question. How do you run this specific script? Like, is it a different process for like running different files, or do you just click the play?
Yeah, I mean, if you have an example, but no, it's really just play. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, like all these other files, it's just examples of other capabilities. But I could have done this whole thing with just this one file. That's it.
Okay. So this is showing like the main, like default.
Correct. Yeah. This is the first view that the app runs. Again, it's because this is the root view that will always be there when you start a new project.
And then you have to change it to demo root there to the name of the file.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
see. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
So if I change it to content view, so content view is the main view that I created for this app. If I just change this one line of code to content view, and then press run, it will show the main app. And why did it fail? It could also just be Xcode because sometimes it goes on. Okay, well, now this is a nice demo of, oh, I think it's because I accidentally removed that. So I just changed that one line of code, right? And now it's showing content view, which is a different file with a lot more code, but does that make sense?
Okay. And then do you have to import those files at all to this like code app?
No, like the content view is, I created it. Again, we created a struct called content view, and this is the code.
Okay.
Just like we created demo view, and here's the code. And it's literally just file, new file, and it's a Swift UI view.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
But yeah, curious how local motion works with the like the spaces of typical paradigms of
What do you mean by locomotion? Like,
so like in the
oh, I see.
No controllers, right?
No, yeah, no controllers. Yep. So the VisionPro has LiDAR sensors. It uses primarily LiDAR and just pass-through cameras to detect your hand gestures. So when you first put on the VisionPro, you'll have to go through calibration, right? Get to know your hands and your eye movements. But yeah, no controllers. It's flawless. I really have not had any issues moving content around, looking at buttons. But yeah, you can move. Yeah, you can move yourself within the scene. Pretty easy, I think. No. It's pretty easy.
And how would a
Yeah.
business distribute apps because they don't have a store to do it, so no, they do it.
How does what? Sorry.
A business distribute an app instead of using a store.
So a business has to use the App Store to distribute an app if you want it to be a public app, right? If you want a private, then you just use what's called device management, so you can distribute your app internally to registered devices. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of enterprises do that. Yeah. So in the interest of time, I will go on the slides, and then I'll be around for questions at the end, of course. Where's my PowerPoint? Oh, okay, there you go. Again, all the code is in GitHub. The link is in the PowerPoint, and then I think in the event. Okay, so this is very specific. I'm going to talk briefly about tracking both objects, kind of surfaces, and hands. So visionOS does support hand tracking, and it's mapped. Oh, my face has been here this whole time. I don't know how to move it. Oh, there you go. Okay, that's so it uses these joints. I'll show you another slide. Don't look at that just yet. Important though. So hand tracking, it requires users' permission. So you know how you load an app that you want to upload photos or use your GPS, you'll get a pop-up, right? This app wants your permission. You have to do the same for hand tracking. If you don't implement that, the app won't work. And as I mentioned earlier, you also need the actual VisionPro to test it. It will crash on your device if you don't have it. And then visionOS 2.0, there's been a bunch of new APIs for tracking, a lot more advanced features, but that's still beta, so I won't go into that right now. So how does it track your hands? It's basically using joints and your wrists. What I'll show you really quickly in the code here coming up is us tracking the index finger. You can also reference chirality, so it knows if you want the left hand or the right hand or both. And then you reference every single joint you want to track with these lines of code. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of a way that you can just track the whole hand. I think you have to reference every single one, but I'm sure there's also an open source like script or something just to do that, but Apple doesn't build it in as far as I'm aware. So this is also part of the same open source project, but here we're tracking the left index finger and the right index finger, and then we're showing a blue sphere just to show it being tracked. I know it looks very laggy. This is because I was recording it as it was tracking. It does not look this laggy on the device. There is still a bit of latency, but it's not nearly as bad as this. And then here we're adding some cubes and adding physics and collision component, and then it's detecting that you're moving it with the finger that we're tracking to interact with it. So this is what the project in the open source code looks like. I will run through the code very quick because we're close to time and it's a bit more complicated. But if you recall, remember we created that struct demo view. Here we're creating a struct. I just called it immersive view. You can call it whatever. But now we're using reality view, which is part of reality kit. And we're doing a bunch of asynchronous functions here. We're also setting up a view model. A view model is where you're doing all your logic of the view. You could do it within the view, but it's just standard practice, as far as I'm aware, in iOS development and now in visionOS development, to separate your view and your logic in something called a model. So really quick, so it's going to set up the content entity. In this case, it's setting up the hand detection. Then it's going to run a bunch of times the hand tracking itself. So as you're moving your hand, it's continuously updating. It's also going to recognize surfaces. That's for the cubes that we're placing. So it's actually not related to the hand tracking. And then here at the end, we're adding a spatial gesture where when the user taps their fingers, it'll locate the surface and drop that cube.
That heart you had, so that had no hand interaction at all, just what was the came with, right?
Correct. Yeah. So those lines of codes, that was it. There was no hand tracking. Correct. Yeah. So that was a view, and now this is the view model. So this is where all the logic and the functions are going to be, the methods. Again, I won't go into detail here, but we're creating different sessions. So we're starting an AR-Kit session. You need that to track hand tracking provider, self-explanatory to track the hand, and then scene reconstruction provider, that's to track surfaces. And then content entities is how the VisionPro is knowing where to place content. You need a root entity, which is a global, it can be a local or a global position. And then here it's creating the finger entities. So you can see here, it's adding a finger entity to both hands because we specify the chirality, both left and the right hand with create fingertip, which is a method later on that I'll show. Then it's doing a bunch of stuff asynchronously. So here it's processing the hand updates. So as your hand is moving, it's very rapidly detecting where those hands are and the fingerprint itself. And then for scene reconstruction here, it's again detecting surfaces, sending that to the view. So it's constantly knowing if you change positions or if you change room, for example, it'll continuously do that. And then here is how you add a cube, pretty simple. You can also just add a 3D model, referencing, for example, the heart from Reality Composer Pro, or just I added this so you can programmatically see how you can create a 3D cube program like with code. And of course, just basic properties like, length, width, height. And that's it. So that's basically what you'll see in the end. These are actually spheres. They look obviously like circles because it's 2D. And that's it. So I will wrap up with some final thoughts, and then I'll open up to questions. So if you are curious about visionOS development, start with SwiftUI, then go into RealityKit and ARKit. You don't need the VisionPro to start learning. In fact, the very first app I built was on iOS. This was in December, like a month before launch, just to understand SwiftUI. You can build an ARKit app for iOS, for iPhone or iPad, for example, just using the camera to place content in space. And then you can make the jump to visionOS. The simulator is not recommended. I do think at first you can use it just to start, but if you're serious about development and to test the device or to test the app, you need the device. But overall, the community has been super great. It's relatively small. I was at WWDC last month, and I met with VisionPro developers. There was like 40 of us, but the iOS meetups, there were like hundreds of people. So it's a lot smaller. Maria, of course, you were there. You saw it. It's a smaller community. But with that, it's also, you get to know a lot more people because it's a smaller knit community, and you can always reach out for questions. But to conclude, I think this is the future. That's why I decided to use my free time and creative energy to do development for VisionPro. Even if I didn't study this or I don't do this as a paid job, I do think there's a lot of potential. And I hope Apple continues to support it and come with a cheaper version later. But yeah, it's exciting times.